Hello YouTube, welcome back to Nutkin Farm. Thought I'd best get back to basics and give you a video from my own property this week. I've just arrived back at the farm and I thought I'd duck out and do a quick video for you guys before I started into several days, hopefully, of productive mowing. And the afternoon of your arrival, you can't really get either motivated or stuck into it, and it's been raining a little bit today. We've just come off a January which had surprisingly less than average rainfall. We normally get about 220 mils, and we ended up with about, I think, 170 odd up in Rosebank. Again, a bit less in Alstonville, about 50 mils less there. But it was an interesting exercise compared to the first season on the farm, in that, the ground has a fair bit of moisture in it. It does retain a bit sometimes, about, even though it gets a bit crumbly on the surface. And the difference in the grass is pretty amazing. You can see, I'll sort of focus in on it there, the sort of length of the grass we're looking at. Now, if you ask the question, when was this last mowed? The answer is 2 weeks ago. I kid you not. This is my leg, and there's where the grass is reaching to on my leg in places. So a good couple of feet in 2 weeks, and it's really, a sign of how fertile the soil is, of course, but also a sign of how much work you need to do. And I've said it before, and I will bore many people by telling them that the grass and the mowing is the biggest thing to do at this time of year, particularly as next week the sweeping and mulching starts, and possibly a dose of herbicide in the tree row. Now, when people talk to you about the tree row, they mean the row in between the two trees, like you see there. And the aim of that is to sort of clear that out so that a sweeper can sweep nuts into the paddock. Where the actual pinwheels of the harvester, which go along the middle track here, pick up the nuts for you. But no talk of the grass anymore, because I'm going to get depressed. What I'm here for is, I got some heartening news from my agronomist the last time he visited here. He said, almost quote unquote, "I'm surprised at how well these blocks, this younger block in particular, block 6, is recovering under the rehab program." And this was always the hope that I had, that these trees here, which were planted in 2006 and then neglected for 11 straight years from 2008 to 2019, some of them never grew beyond what you'd expect of a 3 or 4 year old tree, which is the size of these trees here now. Some of them never grew beyond that. But in the life of a normal macadamia farm, there's meant to be what's called a honeymoon period. This is when the tree's in its prime, in its teens, basically. Between 10 and 20, you can get your maximum crop out of the tree. My theory was that if I played my cards right on these neglected trees, I could encourage them into having their honeymoon, but just in a very delayed state. And so while these trees you see here are now, 16 odd, or 15 or 16 odd years old, they're coming back. So when I inherited the place, there were a lot of what you call silver tops, that is, lots of bare tops of the trees. There wasn't much flush, certainly wasn't much crop. Now, these are A16s. Have a look at the crop. These are big nuts too. They're no slouch for even for an A16, which is a sort of a relatively larger nut. All the way along here, and there are, there's really quite a decent crop on. How many kilos a tree? Look, I don't know. These brown husks are a sign of thrip, in case you're wondering. Normally, a green husk means you sort of no pests. Brown is a sign of thrip. It doesn't mean the nut's not viable, but it does mean that there's been a bit of an attack. And these trees, A16s, all the way along here, which bore me, close to zip crop last season, have decided to take their feed and bear fruit. Now, I fed the whole farm with a product called Silica Booster, which is basically chook manure supplemented with diatomaceous earth for some silica content, and gave all these trees a bit of an extra dose, effectively 2 hectare of this pelleted stuff, and all these lower rows of block 6 got it. And whether it's that or whether it's just the general feeding program, the agronomist now thinks that I'm encouraging these trees into the honeymoon period that they never had. They had it denied because they got stunted in their early growth, and perhaps they've just been longing to perform all these years, and that this year's crop, which you can see in quite large numbers, is a result of these repressed trees now bearing fruit. So in response to that, I got back to the agronomist and I said, look, I've been at you since I bought this farm. What the hell are these trees? We knew that these were A16s because of their habit, their leaf pattern, you know, and now their nuts are proof of it. They've got a fairly large nut, which we don't expect to start dropping until at least about May. They're a later dropping tree. But I had a lot of these other trees that definitely weren't A16s further up the hill, and we were trying to put a fix on what they were. Again, a little bit hard because they were, call it repressed trees. They'd been left too alone for too long. I think we're still sort of A16s here, but so you get further up the hill, it is something different. So my agronomist actually came along and took a closer look and sorted out which of the varieties it might be from the kind of leaves and the kind of fruit that they're bearing. Turns out these are 660. 660 is an older Hawaiian tree, very popular in Hawaii. It was a very prolific bearer of nuts. There's an example for you. Very prolific bearer of nuts, and they're only, and in high kernel recovery too, about 40% kernel, which was at the time in the 1960s and 70s a very high kernel tree. Its only problem was that the kernels themselves tended to be a bit small, and in Australia, if they were planted in suboptimal conditions, they'd give you kernels that the nut processors would reject, because they have to be, well, the nuts have to be 17 millimeters, including the shell, or else they can fall through into a reject pile for being too small. Anyway, these trees here seem to be bearing nuts this year. They've recovered, not quite as dramatically as the A16s, I have to say, but there's definitely some crop on. You see, these nuts are smaller, and unlike the A16s, they're going to start dropping fairly early if they are indeed 660s. So we'll see what the drop pattern's like. If they don't drop early, then I'm going to ask my agronomist to have another guess at what they are. It could well be these are even more repressed A16s, which had smaller leaves and smaller nuts and perhaps gave the wrong impression. But I'm prepared to go with what he says because the leaf pattern seems to match, the nut size, which is smaller, seems to match. And if they are 660s, I suppose the next question is, well, what would I do with them? And the answer is I'd keep them. They've got that ability to be a good cropper. Genetically, they're very close to a 741. 741s can have smaller nuts as well, not as small as the 660. And but again, you know, quite a productive tree, one of the better Hawaiians, quite resistant to diseases, husk spot, the like. And other than the fact that they drop sort of inconveniently earlier than the A16s, they're fine. So that potentially solves a mystery about what's in this block, and when I coax it into its honeymoon period, what I can expect from it, which is a large number of smallish nuts, but still quite valuable. And apparently the 660 was a favourite of the chocolate coating industry, because what they want are small whole nuts that are good for coating in chocolate. You don't want too much nut, because that's the expensive part. The chocolate is in fact the cheap component of the confectionery, but they'll never tell you that. So there's my update, guys. Just a relatively quick one. I will do another one as we go. We're getting back to the A16s here now. I will do another one later as we go, probably after I've done some serious mowing. I've got to focus on that for the moment. Here we go. Now that's an A16 that any farmer would be proud of, even a pretend one like me. Right, well, I hope you have a good week, no matter what it is you're doing, and I will see you again soon. Bye for now.